Hey guys, tonight we slip straight into the dark, shadows stretching, walls breathing, and silence that feels just a little too alive. It's the kind of night where every creak sounds like footsteps, and every flicker feels like a signal. You probably won't survive this if your imagination gets the better of you. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I want to know, where are you watching from, and what time is it where you are right now? Drop it in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself in the Middle Ages, a time that feels like a permanent twilight. Streets are narrow, mud-slicked, and dangerous. Candles barely push back the night, and in the shadows of flickering flame, women carry the heaviest of burdens, pregnancy in a world where every birth is a gamble with death. You don't have hospitals, not really. You don't have doctors you can trust. Most trained physicians ignore women's health altogether. Instead, you're told to rely on whispers, on midwives, on herbs bundled with string. The survival of mother and child feels like tossing dice onto a crooked wooden table. And the odds? They're not in your favor. Pregnancy here is not a gentle Instagram announcement with flowers and sonograms, it's a hush, a prayer, a plea. You feel it like a weight pressing down. Will I live through this? Will my baby live? Or will the night claim us both? The mainstream fact hits you hard. Up to 1 in 3 women in some regions died in childbirth. Imagine that, every third friend, cousin, or neighbor might not return from the birthing bed. And yet, women still carried on. Life demanded it. Villages shrank without children, farms collapsed without families, bloodlines disappeared without heirs. But here's the quirky detail: some women actually carried charms stitched into their gowns or tied around their bellies, tiny metal figurines, carved saints, even bones of animals, like a rabbit's foot, centuries before Vegas gift shops made them cliché. You feel the charm against your skin, half comfort, half superstition, and you hope it works. The thing is, historians still argue whether medieval people truly believed in these charms' magical power, or whether they acted more like today's lucky socks, just enough of a mental boost to feel safer. And honestly, when you're hours away from labor, maybe that little rabbit bone dangling at your hip is the only thing keeping you steady. You breathe deeply, inhaling the smells of the medieval world: stale hay, smoke from damp firewood, sweat, and that faint hint of mold creeping in the corners. It's not a clean world, not a safe one. And you, carrying life, walk it with every step heavier, every shadow more menacing. You laugh softly under your breath, because what else can you do? They say laughter eases the baby's passage, but in your mind you joke, if laughter really helps, then I should hire a jester for the delivery. And honestly, you wouldn't be the first. Some noble women actually kept entertainers close to distract them during labor, though the peasants had to make do with their neighbors' nervous jokes. The night stretches on, and you hear a door slam down the muddy lane. Fear prickles your skin. Was it just the wind, or was it the kind of bad omen that makes the women around you cross themselves 3 times? You're not sure. You clutch your belly and whisper, "Stay calm, stay safe." This is the reality. Being pregnant in the harshest medieval times means you live in a world where hope and terror walk hand in hand, and the outcome is always uncertain. And yet, you press forward. You don't have a choice. You glide, or maybe stumble, if we're honest, into the hush of another night, carrying centuries of whispers across your shoulders. The world around you feels impossibly ancient. Timbered houses press close, the wind sighs through cracks, and each breath tastes of damp stone and distant prayers. You're not alone for this next part. You're with the midwives, those quiet, unheralded guardians of childbirth, your clandestine heroes. Midwives in your village are more than birth attendants, they're repositories of survival, weaving together threads of herb lore, patience, and grit. They've had no degrees, only decades of bearing witness, babies first, tears later. In every hamlet, you know there's one mature woman, maybe a grandmother, summoned when the labor begins. She guides with a steady hand, a whispered chant, and whatever roots or quick-smelling herb she can find. A mainstream fact: midwives were the primary birth attendants in medieval Europe and often the sole practitioners managing childbirth in rural areas. Their wisdom was local, earned over years, and vital to survival. You might soon hear the name Marie Collinet, though she comes from a later age, late 16th century, but her memory ripples backward. She's a Swiss midwife and surgeon, one of the first documented women to perform a caesarean section and use heat therapeutically to stimulate the uterus. Her surgical innovations shine like a candle in a pitch-black birthing room. Historians still argue whether such advanced practice had distant roots in medieval traditions, but her legacy feels like a lantern guiding the lineage of women healers. Now, lean in, for I'll share a strange and unsettling case, the tale of Margarita Vienna, from 16th century records. She supposedly carried a dead fetus for 5 years, enduring pain and hoping for natural resolution until finally undergoing surgery. Real or tall tale? The dates, the names, the clinical details tempt one toward believing. Yet the odds of surviving retention, infection, and surgery seem impossibly stacked. Historians still argue whether this is factual or mythologized. But that story, it lingers in your spine like a warning and a marvel both. And then there's the grim beauty of a coffin birth, discovered in a 7th century grave near Bologna, where archaeologists found a pregnant woman buried face up, the infant positioned between her legs, nature's last, automatic act. A haunting reminder, even in death, life struggles to emerge. As you stand in that burial ground, you feel time compress, the grave's earth, the brittle bones, and the unspoken determination to survive. You breathe, feeling your own pulse in your throat. Around you, ritual mingles with necessity. Women wore birth girdles, parchment strips emblazoned with divine symbols, to be kissed and rubbed during labor, invoking spiritual protection. A recent scientific study confirmed these were used not merely for show. Traces of cervicovaginal fluid, honey, milk, even peas and cereals were found embedded in the parchment, meaning these girdles were actively pressed against bodies, part charm, part medicine. Historians still argue whether these girdles acted more as faith boosters or had practical ritual power, perhaps both. You notice the murmur of prayer rolls, long texts, sometimes lent by monasteries to expectant women. These could be draped like girdles too. If the roll contained the life of Saint Margaret of Anjou, you'd hold it tight, hoping for safe and live delivery, just like rich queens and peasants alike did in 15th century England. Historians still argue how widespread and effective these rolls really were, but in the moment of labor, you'd clutch that parchment like oxygen. A midwife friend once told you of Marjorie Kemp, a mystic from the 15th century who recorded her spiritual autobiography despite being illiterate, dictated to scribes. She recounted a harrowing first birth, accompanied by demonic visions and then divine apparitions. Her trauma and her faith intertwined, her words glowing with fear and hope. Historians still argue how much of her visions were metaphor and how much were literal spiritual encounters, but her story reminds you how pregnant experience could be both mundane and cosmic. You inhale, a laugh escapes in spite of yourself. Maybe I should ask the saint to deliver my baby too, minus the dragon, you quip. Because, yes, Saint Margaret, the dragon-slaying saint, was also the patron of childbirth, invoked by women hoping to emerge from labor triumphantly, not scorched by a beast. Her image, a woman bursting from a dragon's belly, like a C-section miracle, was often depicted in manuscripts as a parallel to actual birth, even though real-life medieval C-sections were last resort and almost always fatal. Historians still argue whether these images shaped medical expectations or simply glittered in devotional art. In the dim glow of candlelight and crowded birthing chambers, midwives and devotional tokens stand beside herbs like rue, mugwort, comfrey, camphor. Women pressed poultices, inserted suppositories, whispered charm prayers, and fought the unseen. You smell musk oil and pennyroyal, you feel every tool, the herbal warmth, the sacral girdle, the midwife's steady voice, the hope laced with dread. Here, you are not alone. You trudge forward, held by women before you, and by stories that made survival feel possible, even when survival itself felt impossible. You're right there, tiptoeing into the blue-black hush of a medieval manuscript chamber, or maybe the cramped corner of a peasant's cottage, just as your mind flickers between suspicion and hope. Hidden knowledge isn't squeaky clean, it's scrawled on tattered scraps, whispered across hearths, and gripped in trembling hands while clergy might frown. You're holding secret lore, contraceptive charms, fertility teas, spells stitched into linen, carefully passed from mother to daughter in furtive silence. Let's catch a real story. You might have heard of prayer rolls, long parchment strips borrowed from monasteries, inscribed with the life of Saint Margaret of Anche. Women wore them like makeshift girdles, chanting petitions for safe delivery. Some rolls were carefully lent from abbeys to expectant mothers, and one record even mentions a monk delivering Our Lady Girdle to Elizabeth, Queen of Henry VIII, 6 weeks before she gave birth to her 11th child in 1502. Pretty fancy paperwork for medieval maternity. And historians still argue whether these rolls worked by divine magic or were mostly comfort blankets, both physically and spiritually. Or consider the literal birth girdle, parchment strips worn around the belly to ease childbirth. Just recently, archaeochemists used high-tech biomolecular tools to analyze one medieval English girdle. They found cervicovaginal fluid, plus honey, eggs, milk, beans, peas, cereals, all medieval childbirth remedies sealed right onto the parchment. So it wasn't just wearing hopes, it was wearing real, messy, medicinal residue. Yet historians still argue whether these ingredients were ritualistic charm or practical remedy. Now you actually smell honey and milk mixing with parchment against your skin. Then you overhear the tale of Angelique du Coudray, but you shake your head, wrong century, wrong stage. Still, her story echoes even further back, a midwife teacher traveling France, publishing early obstetrics books. You wonder, was some of her knowledge secretly preserved in oral traditions? Historians still argue how much medieval midwifery influenced later formal education. You might hear about odd medical marvels, too, like the fascination with lithopedion, or stone babies. A few medieval or early modern cases recorded where fetuses calcified inside the mother over years. One such case in 10th century Cordoba involved a woman treated by the surgeon Abulcasis, who removed fetal bones through a wound in her abdomen, and she survived. It's so bizarre it's whispered more than shown, and historians still argue whether such cases stemmed from medical miracle or myth. You catch yourself giggling, though quietly, stone baby? Maybe I should just get a t-shirt. Because amid the dread of pregnancy, humor is your oxygen, like the woman who supposedly carried a dead fetus for years, must have had a hell of a midwife to still walk upright. All the while, you sense the thrum of forbidden knowledge, fertility potions scribbled in Latin margin notes, herbal recipes passed in code, contraceptive advice hidden in the folds of women's secrets, texts like the Trotula. It's a world where knowledge is life, but sharing it could get you burned at the stake, or banished for encouraging unnatural practices. Historians still argue how much of this knowledge remained underground versus getting codified officially. You breathe in that flickering lamp heat, touching the grain of old vellum, imagining the trembling hand that spelled out a charm, take rue, mugwort, and frankincense, hoping to ease labor or ward off miscarriage. And you think, those daughters and granddaughters clutching these pages, passing them like heirlooms of hope. You feel their courage, a quiet rebellion against ignorance and fear. You step out of the dim library air, lungs filled with candle soot and determination, carrying on. Because hidden knowledge kept women alive, and it's still whispering in your bones. You're still breathing softly in that candle-lit hush, the weight of parchment and old knowledge pressing quiet promises against your skin. Hidden knowledge isn't locked in libraries, it's tucked in your mother's apron pocket, whispered under your breath as you stitch herbs into cloth, a lifeline passed from daughter to daughter. First, the mainstream fact: medieval women, especially midwives, often carried practical medical lore, but literacy and official texts were rare and dangerous. That's why stray manuscripts like the Trotula, a 12th century collection on women's medicine, were so fiercely guarded and widely circulated in whispers. They recommended, for instance, take oil, wax, powder of frankincense, and mastic, let the woman be anointed, to strengthen womb and cotyledons. You feel the scent of wax and frankincense flick as you read that aloud. And historians still argue whether Trotula was authored by a real woman, or is a patchwork of voices, but the fact remains, its advice traveled. Now for a quirky, slightly sticky detail. Imagine a birthing girdle, parchment, or silk or paper, inscribed with prayers, loaned from a monastery, wrapped around your body in labor. Researchers recently subjected one such girdle to biomolecular analysis and found traces of honey, milk, eggs, legumes, cereals, and cervicovaginal fluid, proof it wasn't just symbolic, it was literally pressed against living flesh in the sacred chaos of childbirth. And historians still argue whether it acted more as ritual talisman or tactile support. But in the flicker of labor, you'd feel that parchment against your skin like a whispered blessing. You lean forward, and the story leans with you. From the rich troves of medical texts, here's an intriguing anecdote. The 13th century physician Arnold of Villanova wrote a chapter on how a woman might not conceive, so she could stay marriageable. That's right, contraceptive advice not as sin but as choice, medieval style. Historians still argue how widely such ideas spread, but this flips the usual narrative. Medieval women weren't just passive, they could seek control. Reddit. Then there's the cannily practical, suppositories and fumigations. Medieval medical writers didn't shy from describing vaginal concoctions, resins, herbs, pH-altering agents aimed to prevent pregnancy. Some were medically grounded. Scholars even argue these early spermicidals may have worked. Yet historians still debate how effective, or how common, these methods were. Richard III Society of NSW. You sniff the air, linen, herbs, hot wax, faintly sour milk. You imagine peasant women and midwives stirring fennel, celery, marshmallow, sesame oil, or fragrant myrrh and sulfur fumigations to ease breech births or encourage milk supply. These weren't just recipes, they were lifelines spun in a half-world of ancient medicine and heartfelt fear. Your lips curl into a tired smile. Breech birth. Let me just rub marshmallow on my belly. Yes, humor in the gloom. You know what? That humor is survival too. In stark rooms where reality is tough, jokes become oxygen. You gather these relics of gendered knowledge, treacherous prayers mixed with frankincense, girdles soaked with birth sweat and kitchen remedies, Ayurvedic fumigations, and even contraceptive speculation in male-authored treatises. The whispers converge on one truth: knowledge was power, and it was often hidden. Historians still argue how much of it was shared versus suppressed, but here, in your hands, you hold it all, hope and fear sewn into every herb. You step back from the table of texts, feeling the weight of centuries whispering, "We kept ourselves alive, this is what we knew." And you carry that forward, one breath at a time. You press forward, tracing the flicker of candlelight into the hush of medieval superstition, where every breath feels heavy with old fears and sacred hopes. You glide into the birthing chamber that seems more chapel than bedroom, pounding with the tension of both faith and dread. First, a grounding fact: superstitions and religious rituals were deeply intertwined with childbirth in the Middle Ages. In Muslim Andalusia, midwives, the qabilas, did more than deliver babies. They coordinated subu, a communal ritual on day 7 postpartum. This ceremony included the infant's first haircut, presentation of symbolic objects like the Quran or bread, and a ceremonial procession led by the midwife to welcome the baby into the world. Picture this: warm lamps, incense lingering like old prayers, candles flickering. Women huddle, breathing in the scent of lavender or saffron. A midwife wraps a blue cloth with tiny gold coins around the newborn's head, dangling pearls, or even garlic tied in a bundle at the mother's feet, protective talismans against the evil eye. Some mothers carry amulets worn or immersed in herbal drinks, others place Quranic verses at their bedside. Historians still argue whether these rituals truly warded off unseen forces or whether they served more as emotional anchors, but in the close, tense moments of labor, you'd want every ounce of visible protection. You lean in, absorbing the hush, and then there's the quirky, unexpectedly intricate detail, saints and animals as omens. Imagine women comparing due date prognostications in whispers, or even turning to pregnant storks as fortune tellers. In some towns, storks nested atop Catherine wheels or gallows. Villagers took this as luck, even building similar wheels on rooftops to attract the bird's presence, believing it brought children, or at least protection from misfortune. You can't help but smile. Storks on gallows, the bird version of "look but don't blink," you murmur, half laughing in the candle's glow. These rituals melded with scripture and illiterate devotion too. In some abbey prayer books, indulgences or prayers to saints like Saint Margaret were accompanied by apotropaic images, Christ's wounds or symbols, to anchor divine protection at birth. Midwives and nuns used them like tools, weaving words into chants or wrapping them around mothers, a marriage of faith and maternal care. You let your mind drift to that late medieval English girdle studied by scientists, parchment glowing by candlelight, imprinted with prayers, sweat, honey, oats, and the afterbirth itself, physical imprints of fear and devotion. Historians still argue whether these items were magical shields or practical comfort, but in your bones, they feel both. So you murmur your own quiet joke, "I want a garlic necklace and a stork on the roof." Why not triple the protection? Laughter in the shadows is its own shield, even if it's absurd enough to feel holy. You step back from the scene, bricks of ritual and superstition settling beneath your feet. You sense that every charm, every whispered prayer, every symbolic object wasn't just theater, it was hope, carved half in faith, half in frantic need. You carry on, clutching that mix of fear and faith, knowing you're held by rituals older than memory and more vital than reason. You find yourself in the liminal space between labor's end and the world's reentry, the postpartum hours, where relief and vulnerability live cheek by jowl. The air feels thick still with fear, faithful ritual, and slow healing, and now, postpartum trials are your new night watch. Let's walk this path together. You cradle your newborn, or at least the possibility of one, and the real danger may just be beginning. The mainstream fact presses in: puerperal fever, or childbed fever, was a merciless killer, striking in the hours and days after birth, sometimes even when mother and child seemed safe. Death could arrive swiftly with fever, chills, abdominal pain, and delirium, often unreadable in today's terms but unmistakable then. And yet, it wasn't inevitable everywhere. Mortality was far higher in crowded birthing hospitals than at home. Now, a chilling, almost absurd detail: in 17th century Paris, hospitals treating women in labor saw death rates as high as 100% during epidemics of childbed fever. The doctors, ever confident, went from autopsy rooms straight into the birthing wards, spreading fatal infection without ever washing their hands. Wikipedia. And yet historians still argue whether the fear was more tied to misguided theories of miasma, or to gendered assumptions about the contagiousness of women's bodies, but the outcome was terrifyingly real. You recall a later story, a sobering reminder from the Tudor times: Elizabeth of York, Jane Seymour, and Catherine Parr, each Queen of England, died of childbed fever. Even royal status couldn't shield women from the doctor's plague. Sandra Bird. And yet, historians still debate why highborn women suffered more, even though medical intervention was supposed to protect them. Crowded medical care without hygiene often killed instead. Just to make you pause, quasi-perchanterous humor, but imagine a royal chamber, tapestries heavy with silk, yet the only hero that could have saved the queen was soap and water. Not a bishop, not a relic, just soap. You try to steady your racing thoughts with something quieter. There's this tradition of lying in, a mandated postpartum rest from days to weeks, where you remain bedbound, tended by female relatives or a monthly nurse, waiting for the rite of churching to bring you back to community. Historians still argue whether lying in was more about physical healing or about reinforcing social boundaries, but in your haze of exhaustion, it feels like existence wrung through a sieve of pain, solace, and isolation. You swaddle yourself in the warmth of that, but whisper, maybe I'll ask for a monthly nurse to bring me tea and a pillow under my head, and maybe just a jester for comic relief. Still, your body is tender, vulnerable to infection, bleeding, and heartbreak, your mind fuzzy with awe and relief and fear. You grip the edge of the mattress, breathing deeply. Then, there's the reality of neonatal and infant peril. About 30% of babies died before their first birthday, and another 20% before adulthood. That's a bleak lullaby. But then, nurses from history murmur back, even when tragedy was common, countless mothers survived births, carried forward grief and hope, knitted strength from the silence of grief and the squall of babies. Historians still argue how precisely we should hold those numbers, but you can feel the shape of possibility in survival. You draw a ragged breath and tell yourself, if babies died so often, then each who lived was a rebel, a miracle in a world that wanted you gone. You rock the infant, alive, maybe teeming with life, maybe already lost, maybe ghost soft. The world may bruise you, but you press on. Because even when childbirth, especially childbirth, breaks you, women before you stitched themselves back together. And that endurance is living in you now. You move forward into a space where the air hums with flickering candlelight, half-seen faces, and the scent of straw and sweat. This is the birthing room, not a place of softness but of necessity, ritual, and trembling hope. Here's a fact to ground you: medieval birthing rooms were often crowded, dim, and less clinical than intimate, heated with embers, scented with herbs, and bordered by anxious relatives and the midwife's steady hands. Labor was as much a communal event as it was a medical ordeal, often accompanied by chants, prayers, and herbal infusions. You lean in and catch a whisper of an actual medieval incident. In 14th century England, a chronicler described how villagers held a midnight birth in a cramped thatch-roofed cottage, where the midwife set a tray of hot stones near the mother's belly to ease labor pains. It wasn't comforting in modern terms, but in that cold, damp building, it was the only epidural they knew. And here's something delightfully odd, the quirky detail. In some regions, birthing rooms were perfumed with juniper smoke to both mask odors and ward off evil spirits. You inhale that smoky sweetness mixed with sweat and straw. Nothing says, "Welcome, little one," like smoky upholstery and juniper haze, you murmur. Historians still argue whether the smoke's main purpose was hygiene, scent, or spiritual shielding, but in the thick of birth, the smell feels protective in its own way. Meanwhile, visuality matters. You imagine faint sketches of birthing scenes in a 15th century manuscripts, hollow couches, cushions, kneeling benches, all arranged around a laboring woman. Midwives and female kin hover close, murmuring prayers to Saint Margaret of Anjou, clutching a worn birth girdle around her waist. Historians still debate how widespread such manuscript vignettes were, but they serve as windows into birthing worlds that often went undocumented. You sense movement in the corner. A hand passes a spoon of warm broth, laced with mugwort and chamomile to ease cramps. Somewhere, someone murmurs regimen sanitatis, advice passed in Latin, but here, translated into breath and muscle. And yet historians still argue whether these broths truly eased labor or simply offered a placebo of warmth, but the mother, wrapped in that warmth, might just feel enough relief to let the pain recede, for a moment. You can almost hear the soft hiss of prayer rolls unrolling, salt-stained, frayed at the edges. The midwife reads aloud, "In the name of God, deliver us with mercy," and you feel the words settle into you like balm. You half joke under your breath, "So we've got juniper smoke, medieval broth, birth chants, and I still can't find comfortable seating." Because humor, in the madness, is your soul's cushioning. You let your senses dissolve into the room, the heady scent of herbs, the mottled half-light, the urgency of every breath. You're not just witnessing, you're in it, pressed against history's pulse, cushioned by human hands, floated forward by hope and ritual. You step back, surreal and steady, carrying the memory of that shared moment, warmth, fear, resilience. And you know, you're not just an observer. You're held by those who gathered, prayed, scented, and chanted to bring life into a world that barely let it bloom. You feel the world softening, but not quite safe yet. The labor is over, but you are perched on a fragile threshold, newborn in one arm, trembling awareness of risks in the other. This is postpartum, a time when physical danger and emotional turbulence tighten around you like damp cloth. Here's the fact anchoring you. In medieval and early modern Europe, the period of lying in was both ritual and recovery, a time of strict confinement meant to bless survivors and hold them gently afloat through the haze of birth. You stay bedbound for weeks, sometimes up to a month, while your body bleeds out the remnants of pregnancy, and your world narrows to breaths, feeds, and the quiet vigilance of women around you. Now, the quirk. Picture a lying-in chamber sealed shut, windows and doors closed against the fresh air, everyone convinced it carried dangerous disease. Only trusted female gossips and your midwife are allowed inside, quietly gossiping and drinking cordial, a warm nourishing drink, to bolster your strength, literally feeding you hope with spoonfuls of oat or ale broth. Historian's Edge. Wikipedia. You swallow a spoonful and murmur, cordial, basically medieval soup with a side of moral support. Top-tier self-care. Historians still argue whether lying in was more about bodily recovery or reinforcing social boundaries, and whether poorer women even got to claim such privilege. Historian's Edge. But you? You're lying there midwives-eyed, your instincts rattling between relief and alert, every ache, every silence, a question of am I well yet? You ease back into your pillows, thinking of those layered stages, first, days trapped in bed, then up sitting, when you can finally sit and sip cordial, then moving within the house, and finally, churching. That ritual where, arms wrapped, veil in place, you're led to kneel in church, offer thanks, and be welcomed back into a world that felt sealed away for so long. Polterproject.Northwest. Historians still argue whether churching was about purification, social reentry, or ritual control, but in your tender state, it'll be a lifeline back to belonging. You think of a medieval woman named Mary from 1647. After childbirth she was churched and well, but looks ill enough. That quiet commentary drips with emotional reality, well in word, fragile in flesh. Historians still debate whether well merely meant the bleeding stopped. You can feel that, your body looks calm, but inside, it's frayed. You're still amazed at the social inversion of lying in. A mother strong enough to pass through birth is now shielded from duty, her body determined for recuperation while the household ticks on without her. For a fleeting moment, she holds power in her helplessness. juliamartins.co.uk. Historian's Edge. You murmur, my body, off limits. Finally winning at patriarchy. Still, danger lurks. In those dim chambers, infection, retained lochia, or emotional collapse could sneak in. Death could follow dawn like a thief. Yet the rituals, the immobility, the prayers, the cordial, the female watch, were lifelines spun from fear and fragile hope. You feel the walls leaning in, warm and dark, the hush of women near. You sense your heartbeat slow, pouring into place beside ancient rhythms. You round the corner of your night vigil with gratitude, for soft blankets, for the midwife's hand, for the ritual of lying in that keeps you breathing. And you carry onward, still raw, still trembling, still alive. You lie in the quiet, heavy with recovery, and yet, shadows are never gone for long. The danger shifts, invisible, seeping into the body even after labor is complete. You might feel your cheeks burn, your breath catch, your skin grow clammy. This is the enemy no one can see, the whisper that mothers feared most, childbed fever. It starts with something so simple, just a chill. Women called it milk fever or the hot flux. Within hours, that chill becomes searing heat, the skin flushing, the womb aching, delirium setting in. Midwives knew the signs, and yet their remedies were powerless against it. Some tried wine boiled with rosemary, others pressed leeches to the skin, hoping to draw out poison. You, shivering, clutch your blanket and wonder if you'll be among the ones who survive. The fact is stark. This fever was one of the leading killers of women after childbirth in Europe. And though no one understood bacteria or hygiene, they could see its pattern. Sometimes whole wards of mothers died within days. Imagine lying in a lying-in hospital, hearing the coughing, the cries, and then silence. And still, the doctors never washed their hands, wandering from cadavers to mothers, carrying death on their fingertips. A strange and morbid story lingers in whispers. In Bologna, long after a woman was buried, archaeologists found her skeleton, pregnant, with the tiny bones of her child between her legs. She had died in childbirth, and days later, as her body decomposed, the fetus was expelled in what's called a coffin birth. The grave kept her secret for centuries, but when the earth gave her back, it told the tale of how fever and death reached even the cradle. It's haunting, and yet it's real. Historians still argue whether people of the time believed fevers were punishments for sin, curses laid by enemies, or simply bad air rising from rotting waste. The truth is, in the fog of medieval thought, all three felt possible at once. Imagine you, lying there in the dark, wondering if you had angered God, if a neighbor had cursed you, or if the wind itself was poisoned. Sometimes, cures bordered on the desperate. There are records of women being wrapped in wet sheets, as though cooling the body could beat the fever back. Others drank mixtures of vinegar and crushed pearls, believing the purity of the jewel could cleanse the blood. You sip the bitter liquid, grimace, and joke softly, a pearl cocktail, just what every exhausted new mom needs. The women laugh with you, because laughter, however brittle, is still a shield. But here's the thing, survival was possible. Not every fever killed. Some women staggered back to health, pale and thin, and carried on. And those who did survive? They were marked, not just by scars of body but by a new reverence in their village. Neighbors would nod and say, "She passed through the fire." You listen to the hush of your own pulse, heavy and uneven, and wonder which way you will fall. In the dim room, the midwife leans close, whispering encouragement, as though words alone could push the fever away. And maybe, in a way, they can, because belief itself is medicine in a world without cure. You close your eyes. The fever might rise, or it might fade. No one can tell. All you know is that your story, like so many before you, balances on the edge of night, with faith, fear, and fragile breath keeping you tethered here. The baby cries, thin, high, insistent. You clutch the swaddled bundle close, and suddenly your thoughts pivot from your own trembling body to the fragile life in your arms. Because survival isn't just about you anymore, it's about this small, red-faced miracle who has landed in a world that is, frankly, not very gentle. Here's the hard fact, in the harsh centuries of the Middle Ages, nearly 1 out of every 3 children didn't live to see their 5th birthday. Infant mortality was so common that families rarely celebrated too soon. Many waited days, sometimes weeks, before recording a birth in church registers. It wasn't cruelty, it was a shield for the heart. You glance down and feel the baby's breath on your wrist. Midwives and mothers worked tirelessly to keep little ones alive, smearing honey on gums for strength, or tying charms to cradles to ward off spirits. A ribbon, a scrap of scripture, even a carved amulet tucked into the wrappings, all were believed to guard against unseen hands that might snatch a baby away in the night. And the quirky part? In some towns, it was said that if a baby refused to nurse, a sliver of toasted hedgehog skin, yes, hedgehog, could be placed beneath the mother's breast to tempt the child's appetite. Imagine you, weary and sore, whispering, "Darling, don't mind the hedgehog, just drink." You chuckle at the absurdity, because humor, even dark humor, is another kind of shield. Still, historians argue whether breastfeeding was universally encouraged. Some mothers nursed their own babies, but many, especially among the wealthy, hired wet nurses, passing their children into the arms of another woman's body. Was this seen as convenience, or was it survival, ensuring the mother could bear another child sooner? The debate lingers. But here you are, milk flowing, baby latching, trying not to wince as tender flesh learns the rhythm of feeding. The cradle beside you is nothing like the polished wooden pieces we picture today. Sometimes it's a basket lined with wool, other times just a padded trough by the fire. Mothers rocked with their feet while spinning wool, humming lullabies that survive in fragments of medieval verse. You hum along in your head, the melody more vibration than tune, the kind of sound that keeps both mother and child tethered to waking dreams. And then comes baptism, a ritual rushed, because the fear of death is always near. Babies were often baptized within hours, even if the mother herself was still bedridden. Water sprinkled, names spoken, godparents appointed, all as a shield against eternal limbo if the baby died. You picture yourself watching, body aching, as your baby's head is touched by holy water. Relief surges. At least, you think, their soul is safe, even if their body is still so frail. Sometimes, entire communities shared in the care. Neighbors would bring broth, bread, or simply warm arms to rock the child. And yet, just as often, poverty meant the opposite, mothers alone, too weak to rise, trying to hush a wailing newborn with nothing but a rag soaked in wine to help it sleep. That image lingers, sharp and uncomfortable, but it's part of the truth. You think of the women before you, some losing child after child, burying tiny bundles wrapped in linen, and still carrying on. There are stories of mothers planting herbs on infant graves, as though rosemary or lavender could carry memory into eternity. The resilience is staggering. And here you are, cradling your baby tighter, whispering, "Not this one. Please, not this one." The fire crackles low. The baby stirs, sighs, and drifts back to sleep. In that moment, you feel history's entire weight, fear, love, ritual, and fragile hope, resting on the small rise and fall of a newborn's chest. The days stretch forward, and as your strength returns, you realize survival isn't just about childbirth or fevers, it's about living in a world where a woman's body is treated as both sacred and expendable. Every corner of life hums with danger, but also with stubborn endurance. You rise slowly, cradling your baby, and the larger web of society pulls into focus. The fact is simple: medieval women lived under laws and customs that made their lives precarious. In many towns, a woman could not own land outright unless she was widowed. Her body was tied to marriage, her fertility tied to her worth. And yet, within the walls of kitchens, marketplaces, and lying-in chambers, women built their own networks, quiet power in whispered advice, shared remedies, and the solidarity of survival. Sometimes, survival meant leaning on odd beliefs. Imagine being told that wearing a girdle blessed by a saint would make childbirth easier, or that carrying a sprig of juniper would protect your milk. These rituals weren't just superstition, they were emotional armor. You tie the sprig into your sash and whisper, "Better safe than sorry." Humor flickers through your voice, because if you didn't laugh, you'd drown in fear. And still, historians argue whether women in these centuries were mostly powerless or subtly influential. Yes, laws restricted them, but evidence shows midwives advising even nobles, widows running businesses, and mothers shaping entire households. It wasn't open rebellion, it was survival through the cracks of authority. Quirky stories echo through records. One midwife in 14th century France was fined for prescribing love potions on the side, her remedies part medicine, part mischief. Another tale tells of a village woman who swore her easy birth came from sleeping on her husband's shirt the night before labor, because the shirt carried his strength. You grin at that, thinking, if laundry ever made life easier, history owes us an apology. The body itself bore marks of survival. Women often carried scars of torn flesh, prolapsed wombs, or aching bones from years of labor and pregnancy. And yet, many lived into old age, toothless and bent, surrounded by grandchildren. To survive birth was to claim a seat at the fire in later years, telling younger women, I passed through it, you can too. That inheritance of resilience became its own form of medicine. At times, the survival of mother and child depended on community charity. Churches kept small funds for widows and abandoned children. Orphans were sometimes placed with wet nurses or raised in monasteries. And still, tragedy pressed close, hunger, disease, and war all widened the cracks. You imagine a mother swaddling her baby tighter during a famine, whispering lullabies on an empty stomach, choosing which morsel of bread to keep for herself and which to press into a child's mouth. And yet, survival is not just grim, it's inventive. Women turned kitchens into apothecaries, brewing remedies from nettle, sage, or even powdered oyster shells. They stitched clothes out of scraps, fed children on broth made from bones no one else wanted, and found joy in lullabies, in gossip, in the warm chaos of survival. You see yourself there, laughing with neighbors even as smoke from the hearth stings your eyes, because laughter makes the hunger smaller, at least for a moment. So here you stand, baby in arms, body still tender, yet mind sharper than ever. Survival is no longer just about enduring pain, it's about building a life from fragile beginnings. And though history rarely recorded the quiet victories of women, the fact that you breathe, that your child sighs softly in sleep, means those victories were countless. You glance out the narrow window, the sky pale with dawn. Another day waits, filled with dangers and small triumphs. And you, scarred, weary, yet unbroken, step forward into it. The seasons turn, and you begin to see how survival is never just the work of a single mother or midwife, it's the weaving of an entire community. A village's heartbeat is carried not only in prayers but in gossip, rituals, and strange customs that feel half practical, half mystical. You rise from your bed and rejoin this tapestry, baby at your hip, body still sore yet carried forward by habit. One thing is certain, women leaned on each other. In markets, at wells, during long nights at the hearth, knowledge passed hand to hand like bread. Remedies for milk supply, tricks for swaddling, whispered warnings about which neighbors had the evil eye, all traded as though survival itself depended on it. And often, it did. Here's a hard fact, childbirth was the most dangerous ordeal most medieval women would ever face, but it wasn't the only one. Disease stalked every alley. Plague, smallpox, dysentery, all could undo mother and child in days. And without doctors who understood germs, midwives and mothers fought back with herbs, amulets, and faith. You imagine yourself stringing garlic above your door, not because you're fond of the smell, but because everyone insists it keeps away sickness, and maybe, just maybe, it does. And the quirky bits. Some believed tying a baby's cradle to the leg of the family table ensured the child would stay grounded and not wander off in life. Others swore that rubbing a baby's gums with rabbit fat would make teeth come in smoothly. You shake your head, muttering, somewhere out there, a rabbit gave its all for dental care. The women around you laugh softly, because yes, it's strange, but also strangely comforting. Historians still argue whether midwives were viewed as respected healers or suspicious figures teetering on the edge of witchcraft. In some towns, they were honored with gifts of bread and ale, in others, they were dragged to court, accused of dark dealings. Imagine you, trusted to bring life, suddenly feared as one who might also bring death, The line was thin, and survival meant balancing carefully on it. In the evenings, you walk outside with the baby wrapped tight, the air heavy with wood smoke and manure. Neighbors greet you, and you see how every family's survival is intertwined. If your milk runs dry, another woman might nurse your child. If you fall sick, another might bring broth. And in return, you will spin wool, mend clothes, or stand as godparent for someone else's infant. Survival is never solitary, it's communal, messy, and deeply human. Sometimes the stories turn strange. There's a tale of a baby who wouldn't stop crying until the midwife placed the father's hat over the cradle, a symbol of protection, they said. Another tells of mothers whispering their fears into knots tied in string, then burying the string in the earth so the worries would rot away underground. You picture yourself tying those knots, each one a tiny exhale of fear, pressing them into the soil, and stepping back lighter. And yet, dangers never sleep. War can sweep through a village, leaving mothers hiding children in cellars or forests. Famine can empty breasts of milk. Still, history is filled with women who carried children on their backs while working the fields, who planted seeds with one hand and cradled infants with the other. Their endurance wasn't glamorous, but it was extraordinary. You sit again by the hearth, rocking the baby, hearing the soft rhythm of neighbors moving about their lives. The fire crackles. The night deepens. And in that quiet, you understand something. Survival here is not just about medicine or faith, it's about connection. Without the community, no one endures. With it, even the harshest medieval night feels a little less cruel. The years slip forward, and the baby in your arms grows heavier, rounder, and louder with laughter. You've survived the first fragile months, and now you step into the rhythm of raising a child in a medieval world, where every milestone is shadowed by both danger and celebration. The fact that lingers in your mind, childhood was perilously short. Many children were expected to begin working by the age of 7, herding geese, gathering firewood, or learning trades. Until then, survival meant constant vigilance. A small cough could spiral into fever. A bad season of crops could steal their strength before they ever grew tall enough to see over the hedge. And yet, joy lived here too. Mothers carved toys from scraps of wood, tied bells to tiny ankles, and sang songs that doubled as prayers. Some customs around children feel odd to modern ears. For example, it was believed that shaving a baby's head would help the hair grow thicker. Picture your sweet one, round-headed and bald, while you murmur, "Trust me, it's for your future fashion." Another quirky belief, tying coral beads around a child's neck not only protected against teething pain but also kept away witches. You chuckle and think, teething and witch defense in one accessory? That's efficiency. Historians still argue whether medieval families loved their children with the same depth we imagine today. Some argue children were seen as replaceable due to high mortality rates. Others insist that letters, lullabies, and little graves adorned with flowers prove an enduring tenderness. You, standing over your child's cradle, know the truth in your bones. Love clings even in hunger, even in fear. The work of raising a child is endless. Cloth must be washed, swaddles boiled, herbs ground into soothing poultices for colic. Some mothers used honey as a pacifier, though it carried its own risks. Others rubbed wine on gums to quiet cries, a medieval sleep aid, though you sigh at the thought of a tipsy infant. And yet, these small rituals kept sanity intact when the nights grew long. The village itself raises your child with you. Older children act as caretakers, rocking cradles while mothers haul water. Neighbors share scraps of food, offer milk if you cannot produce, and stand as extra eyes when toddlers wander too close to the hearth. There's even a recorded case of communities rotating babies among households during plague outbreaks, hoping that dispersal would keep at least some alive. Imagine that wrenching choice, whispering, "I'll give you my child today, pray return him tomorrow. Stories cling to the edges of memory. One tale tells of a child saved from drowning when a midwife whispered the Lord's Prayer backward as she pulled the baby from the water. Another of a boy who was given nothing but goat's milk for years and grew so strong the villagers swore he had horns of iron. Whether truth or legend, they reveal the desperation to make sense of survival. And as your child begins to toddle, your own survival shifts. The danger of childbirth has passed for now, but motherhood stretches into endless vigilance. You chase small feet away from fire, hush cries in church, and watch tiny hands clutch at bread crusts with the hunger that never quite goes away in this age. You trade exhaustion with other mothers, rolling eyes, laughing softly, because if you don't laugh, you'll cry. The fire burns low, and you feel your child's warm weight against your side. Despite the fragility, there is strength here, a resilience woven into lullabies, charms, and daily labor. You kiss the small forehead and whisper to the dark, "Grow strong, little one. Outlast me." The child grows, and so do you. The months roll into years, and now survival is no longer the fragile miracle of one night. It is the daily grind of life in a world that never softens its edges. Your body bears the marks, hips widened, back aching, hands roughened from both mothering and labor. Yet here you are, steady and alive, teaching your child how to live in a land where safety is never promised. Here's a blunt fact: in many medieval towns, women carried the double burden of household labor and physical work in the fields. You rise before dawn, stir the fire, bake bread, then step outside to hoe the soil or gather water. All the while, a baby might cling to your back, or an older child tug at your skirts. Survival is motion. You do not stop, because stopping means hunger. And then come the odd, almost whimsical customs that make you pause. Some mothers stitched protective charms into their children's clothes, tiny crosses, knots of red thread, or even scraps of wolf fur, believed to lend strength. Imagine sewing a patch into your child's sleeve and saying with a smile, "This isn't just fabric, it's wolf power." Quirky, yes, but also profoundly tender. Historians still argue whether medieval women had any real say in family decisions. Some evidence suggests they were voiceless, overshadowed by husbands. Others point to wills and contracts that reveal widows running households, arranging marriages, even lending money. The truth, like survival itself, seems to lie in the middle. You may not be the lord of the manor, but you are the quiet strategist who keeps everyone alive. And then there are the stories, half remembered, half whispered, that bring history to life. A record tells of a Flemish woman who, after losing 2 infants, swore that no child of hers would sleep without a sprig of rosemary at the cradle. Another tale speaks of a midwife accused of witchery because too many of her babies survived, proof, they said, of unnatural powers. You shiver at that, realizing that survival itself could look suspicious in a fearful age. But there are moments of joy, too. Festivals where children chase geese through muddy streets. Feasts where women laugh as they trade recipes for barley gruel that won't taste like gruel. Even gossip, passed over fences or whispered by wells, carries life. It is community, and community is survival. You laugh softly, realizing that in any age, a mother's favorite currency is still who did what with whom. And of course, danger never fades. War rolls over the horizon from time to time, leaving widows and orphans in its wake. Famine creeps in with bad harvests, thinning children's cheeks. Illness returns like a tide. And yet, you keep going. You clutch your child's hand tighter, you find another herb, another prayer, another trick whispered by an older woman. You learn to live in the spaces between catastrophe, finding joy in a child's first words, or in the simple rhythm of a spinning wheel's hum. At night, you tuck your child beside you, close enough to share warmth under coarse blankets. The wind rattles the shutters, the dark feels thick, but your heartbeat steadies theirs. And in that steadying, you understand, survival in this world isn't just brute endurance, it's love made stubborn. Love that sews charms into sleeves, whispers over cradles, and rises before dawn no matter how heavy the body feels. And so, the days move forward, rough yet glowing in small sparks. You survive, and in surviving, you teach the next generation to do the same. The nights grow longer, the air colder, and you begin to see the years not as single struggles but as an endless weaving of survival, thread by fragile thread. You've birthed children, buried neighbors, tended to wounds both visible and invisible. And yet you endure. Now, survival is no longer about one baby, one birth, one day at a time. It becomes about legacy, how your knowledge, your rituals, and your resilience echo into the future. A historical truth stands before you like a stone wall. Medieval Europe was defined by repetition. Generations lived and died in the same villages, under the same rhythms of planting and harvest, marriage and mourning. But within that monotony, women carried the quiet revolution of continuity. Every swaddling technique, every herbal recipe, every whispered superstition became part of a living library. When you cradle a child, you hold not just your own blood, but centuries of women's survival strategies pressed into your hands. You see the cycle play out in others. A neighbor girl marries young, and you watch her belly swell. She comes to you at dusk, nervous, whispering, "What if I don't survive it?" And you laugh gently, though you feel the fear yourself. "You will," you say, pressing dried sage into her palm, "because we all help each other." And in that moment, you realize you've become what your midwife once was to you, the keeper of fragile courage. And yes, there are quirky details that almost lighten the heaviness. Some women believed a woman in labor should clutch an iron key, because iron warded off evil, and the key symbolized unlocking the womb. Imagine muttering to yourself, "Great, I'm half screaming, half locksmith." Others swore that a mother who sneezed during childbirth would make the baby come quicker. You almost want to test it, but then again, you'd rather not sneeze at the wrong time. Still, historians debate whether these practices were born from pure desperation or if they held deeper, symbolic meaning tied to religion and cosmology. Did the iron key really unlock a spiritual passage? Or was it simply comfort, an object to grip when the body became an inferno of pain? The arguments continue, and you nod at both sides, because lived truth often holds more than one meaning at once. You walk through the village and notice how your child, no longer a baby, chases chickens, learns to speak in full sentences, and begs for scraps of bread. Childhood here is fleeting. By 7 or 8, children are apprenticed or sent to work. You feel your heart twist when your daughter helps with spinning, her small hands pricked by wool fibers. Or when your son trudges to the fields, barely taller than the scythe he tries to carry. Survival in this world demands labor even from the small. And yet, when you see them laughing in the mud, you remember joy cannot be starved entirely. Now picture the communal spaces, the churchyard buzzing with gossip after Mass, the market stalls crammed with smells of onions, fish, and tallow. These places become stages for women to trade not only goods but also secrets of survival. "Try fennel for colic," one says. "No, nettle soup is better," another insists. You realize, grinning, that medieval parenting forums were just huddles of women by a well. And then there are the darker tales, where survival and suspicion collide. A woman in a neighboring town is accused of witchcraft because a baby she delivered died hours after birth. Never mind that childbirth is always dangerous, fear seeks someone to blame. The midwife is dragged to court, interrogated, and you whisper a prayer under your breath. Because you know, the same hands that deliver life can be painted as hands of death. It is a cruel irony, one that women walk like a tightrope every day. You return to your home at night, exhausted but unable to rest fully. The child sleeps beside you, breath warm against your neck. You remember the talismans hanging above the bed, the sprig of rosemary, the iron scissors crossed to cut off evil, the crude little figurine carved from bone. Do you believe in them? Maybe, maybe not. But in a world where medicine is uncertain and survival fragile, belief itself is a form of strength. Let me share some stories etched into this era's memory. In one account, a woman survived childbirth by drinking a broth of boiled shoes, yes, shoes, because leather was thought to contain strength absorbed from the earth. You wrinkle your nose at the thought but admit, desperate times, desperate broths. Another tale recalls mothers in famine chewing tree bark into pulp to feed their infants, spitting softened wood into tiny mouths. It is shocking, yes, but also achingly human. Love refuses to let go, even when food has vanished. As the years pass, you begin to measure survival not in days or weeks but in who carries your teachings forward. You see your daughter kneeling by the fire, watching how you steep herbs for a poultice. You catch her humming lullabies to her younger brother. And you smile, knowing that even if you vanish tomorrow, some piece of your wisdom, born from countless women before you, will ripple into her hands. Historians still argue whether medieval women were entirely trapped by their era or whether they carved out hidden pockets of autonomy. The debates circle endlessly. Were you voiceless, or were you the quiet backbone of every village? You lean back by the hearth, your body weary but your eyes sharp, and think, both are true. You are bound, yet you are the binding itself. Without you, nothing holds. Your days roll on like this: birth, laughter, illness, mourning, planting, harvest, and winter once more. It is not a life of luxury, nor of safety. But it is a life of grit, tenderness, and strange beauty. You endure, and in enduring, you keep the thread unbroken. Even as famine whispers, even as plague waits beyond the horizon, even as your body grows weaker with age, you survive, and you pass survival forward. The fire crackles. The children breathe softly nearby. And in that quiet moment, you understand something that feels almost eternal. The harshest times are not survived through strength alone, but through love, stitched stubbornly into every act of care. The seasons have spun so many times now that you hardly notice the way your hair threads itself with silver, the way your hands stiffen when you knead bread, or the way your breath shortens when you climb the village hill. You are older, slower, but you are still here, and that itself is a kind of miracle. Survival in the medieval world has never been guaranteed, especially for women, especially for mothers. Yet you've outlasted famine, plague, and the merciless churn of childbirth. Now, as you watch the next generation stumble and rise, you begin to see survival not just as endurance, but as inheritance. A historical fact that presses itself forward: women over 40 in the Middle Ages were rare to see as matriarchs, because many did not live that long. Childbirth, infection, and sheer malnutrition claimed countless lives early. To be an older mother, or even a grandmother, meant you were extraordinary. You were living evidence of resilience. In some villages, older women were even seen as walking libraries, keepers of healing knowledge, prayers, and charms. When you walk through the market now, the younger girls glance at you not with pity but with hope, as if your very body is proof they too might endure. And here's a quirky custom that adds a sliver of humor to the heavy years. In some places, elderly women were asked to whisper blessings into loaves of bread baked for weddings or festivals. Why? Because old women were thought to carry tested luck. Imagine yourself muttering into a crusty loaf, "May your marriage be less sour than this bread." You laugh softly at the thought, and the bread still tastes fine. But scholars still debate whether women of your age were respected as wise, or feared as witches. Was grey hair seen as authority, or as danger? Some say the church tried to honor good matrons while condemning suspicious crones. You sit by the fire and smile at the irony. Wisdom could save or destroy you, depending on who was listening. The stories continue. You remember how a midwife in your youth was nearly burned after being accused of unnatural arts. And yet, in the same breath, nobles summoned other midwives, desperate for their help during complicated births. Need and fear lived side by side, and women like you walked that knife edge carefully. You wonder how many of your whispered remedies, the rosemary, the nettle teas, the charms stitched into sleeves, will survive beyond your lifetime. You sit outside one evening, the sky bruised with sunset, and you hear the village children shouting as they chase each other with sticks and laughter. Among them are your grandchildren. Their cheeks are full despite the meager harvest, their feet quick on the dirt road. You feel a surge of pride, though you say nothing. Survival has carried forward, hand to hand, breath to breath. There are lighter moments, too. A tale reaches you of a village where women used pig's bladder as makeshift balloons for children's games. The image makes you chuckle. Even in hardship, children find ways to play, and mothers find ways to make do. You recall your own days of turning scraps of cloth into dolls, or teaching your little ones how to skip stones at the river. Joy may be fragile, but it insists on being born again and again. Yet danger never disappears. War still drags through the land like a hungry wolf. One year, soldiers stripped the village of food, leaving families to survive on boiled nettles and thin porridge. Another year, plague returns, and you keep rosemary sprigs by the window, praying the sickness passes your door. You know better than to believe in permanent safety. Safety here is always temporary, a pause, never a promise. But as you grow older, your perception shifts. You begin to see survival not as frantic resistance but as a slow, deliberate rhythm. You gather herbs at a careful pace, you speak to children in softer tones, you accept that some days will be pain and others will be laughter. You endure by leaning into patience, by teaching others to prepare, by embodying persistence. You recall one more strange little tale. Some women believed that burying the umbilical cord beneath the hearthstone would ensure the child always returned home safely, no matter how far they wandered. You picture all the hidden cords lying beneath kitchens across Europe, tiny buried promises of love and protection. Perhaps, you think, that's what survival truly is, promises buried deep, carried forward unseen. Now, the world grows quiet again. The fire burns low, your family breathes softly around you, and you realize your story, though filled with danger, loss, and struggle, has been, at its heart, a story of love. Love stitched into charms, whispered into bread, hidden in hearthstones, and carried in lullabies. And tonight, that's where we leave you. You, still alive in a harsh medieval world. You, still stubbornly clinging to life and passing its fragile flame into the hands of those who come after. Because in the end, survival is not a single act. It is a chain. And you, tired but unbroken, are one glowing link in it. And now, we slow everything down. The pace eases, the edges soften. You've walked through famine, fear, and firelight, and somehow, you made it. The story of survival is not quick, and it's not easy. But here, at the end of the night, we set down that heavy bundle and let ourselves breathe. Picture the village now, not in turmoil, but in rest. The fields lie dark under the moon, the animals settle in their pens, and smoke drifts lazily from the last chimneys. The air is still. The dangers of plague, war, hunger, they can wait until tomorrow. For this moment, all that matters is the warmth of the bed beneath you, the slow rhythm of your heartbeat, and the calm hush wrapping itself around the world. The fire has burned down to glowing embers. They pulse gently, like a heartbeat in the hearth, casting a soft orange light that flickers across the walls. Children sleep deeply, their dreams carried safely by your quiet watch. And outside, the stars remind you that even in centuries of struggle, there is always beauty, steady and untouchable. So let go now. You don't need to clutch at herbs, charms, or whispered prayers. You've made it to the end of this journey, and here you can finally rest. Your breath slows, your body softens into the bed, and your thoughts drift like leaves in a calm stream. The harshness of history fades. The struggle fades. What remains is peace, soft, simple, and steady. Good night.